Hey everybody, it's Cliff again. Today I want to talk about AI. I'm not an expert, so let's not think I'm an expert on AI, but I do use GPT chat, I do use Gemini, I do use Copilot by Microsoft. Um, and sometimes when we think of the cloud or we think about AI, we sometimes just think it's out there. It's weightless, it's an invisible thing that doesn't have a burden on society or anything. But the reality is much heavier. Behind every click, every stream, every AI prompt, there sits a massive, windowless concrete warehouse that can take up quite a bit of a physical imprint or footprint on a community. Right now, the explosive growth of these data centers is colliding head on with local communities. When you look past the high tech sales pitch, the real world consequences boil down to three major issues. The first issue is the sheer strain on our basic resources. The facilities run around the clock, consuming mind boggling amounts of electricity and water. To keep the power grid from collapsing under this new demand, some utility companies are actually delaying the retirement of old, dirty coal and gas plants. Now, I know that some people say there's such a thing as clean coal. I'm not a coal expert. I have no knowledge of it, very little knowledge. I do know that it is dirty. I know that a lot of folks who have gone off the grid use coal to heat their homes and power equipment and such like that. That's fine, but we are talking about massive coal burning plants, electrical plants that can and apparently can and do pollute the atmosphere, pollute our air, and can ruin our environments. Um, but at the same time, keeping these hot servers cool requires also millions of gallons of water a day, and that's true. Um, I would recommend at one point they should build them in the Antarctic or colder regions, but then I realized, from what I understand, the amount of heat they put out um, can eventually cause the icebergs to melt. I'm not an expert again, but these are considerations. So for a while there, people were taking data centers and such like that at their word that the community would get money back, taxes would be better, and all that. But the downside, in many cases, that's not true. We're beginning to see some major pushback in dry states like Arizona and Utah, and even in Fayetteville, Georgia, where residents have suddenly realized a single nearby facility was drawing enough water to supply a small town to keep their plants cool. Second is, what does this do to the people living next door? A data center doesn't just quietly sit here or there. It hums. The massive cooling fans on the roofs run constantly, creating a low frequency drone that neighbors compared to an idling jet engine. It's ruining sleep, causing anxiety, and tanking property values. On top of that, these giants eat up farmland and historic sites, demanding towering new voltage power lines right next to residential neighborhoods. And despite the promise of an economic boom, they don't actually bring long-term employment. Once the construction wraps up, a massive facility might only need a skeleton crew of a few dozen people to keep the lights on. And we've seen promises like this before. Um, I mean, I'm going to non non-buildings like data centers, like football stadiums and such like that. The promises are made that there'll be jobs after construction. Really, there aren't. Depends upon how popular teams are. So it seems like that companies think they can lure communities into doing things that can actually wind up hurting themselves, but better them. Then there's a financial sting to the regular citizens in the community. Tech companies, like any other company that moves into an area, can and do get massive tax breaks to build these sites. But the cost of upgrading the local power grid to support them gets passed right back down to you and me. That costs us more money. Data centers get to walk free for the most part. We are subsidizing the tech industry's massive power bill through their own rising monthly utility rates. Remember, these things suck power. The more people that use AI, the more powerful that AI gets, um, the more power is needed to run these data centers. And that all comes out of our power systems. And there's very little reimbursement from the data grids companies. Um, there's an it's a lopsided trade-off. Local communities are taking it. on the nose. Like if we had data centers here where I live, we would probably have to be paying the bill for them with promises of full employment and such like that, but highly unlikely. Um, the resource strain and the bills, while a handful of the tech giants walk away with profits, they also require heavy electrical infrastructure, meaning towering transmission lines and new substations are built right next to homes, and you pay for that. Um, there's minimal job creation. I've already been mentioned this, but while construction begins temporary work, a completed, fully operational hyperscale data center requires very few firm staff. Again, often enough for a few dozen guards, technicians, and managers. For the local community, this represents a massive trade-off of land and resources, very little long-term economic benefits, including employment. So under the economic and ratepayer pressures, ratepayers being us, citizens of the community, the financial burden of upgrading the power grid to accommodate these energy giants is increasingly falling on regular citizens. You're going to find eventually you'll have surging utility bills because the utility companies need to build new infrastructure, power plants, lay miles of high voltage transmission lines, and upgrade substations to handle the massive load. In many states, these multi-billion-dollar infrastructure costs are passed right down to us. I mean, you see this in regular life almost every day. I mean, the fires out in California that were created by the power company out there. Um, the cost of those fires basically were not absorbed by the power company. It was passed along to the ratepayers, the people who get the power supplied to them. And the same happens with data centers. Everything will get pushed back to us. Tax breaks, and then we have other things like tax breaks versus the public cost. In many cases, state and local governments offer massive tax incentives and exemptions to attract these tech companies, hoping for economic development. Excuse me. However, critics argue these deals do deprive the local municipalities of tax revenue that could otherwise offset the strain on public infrastructures and resources. And an interesting development took place here recently. I know President Trump criticized the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, for putting a pause, not stopping on a permanent basis at this point, but putting a pause on the building and creation and building of data centers in Texas. His biggest concern was that what are the costs now, and what will be the costs in the future for power and water? And they apparently sent a request out to the data center companies, or however you want to say it, the data center companies that want to build their data centers, wanted to know what these present costs will be and what are the future costs. And I'm not sure how many they went to, but Governor Abbott said today, or recently, excuse me, that only 10% responded. That's why he put a pause on building data centers. So why did only 10% responded? What, they didn't take the state of Texas seriously, or they didn't want the state of Texas to know? And that's the way you have to push back. There was a massive data center being planned for in Utah, I believe, from one of the I can't remember the gentleman now, but he's on the show Shark, and he's a billionaire, and he was apparently wanting to take over 4,000 acres of land in Utah to build a data center. And apparently, the community involved was their board members, their governing body was quite willing to do that, but there was a massive pushback by many local citizens. And I believe you'd have to check this into this. I believe there was an intent and a threat to the board of commissioners, or whatever the governing body is called, that they'll be voted out if this goes through. So I think they have put a pause on everything and reduced the footprint of the data center down to something much smaller, like maybe a couple hundred acres. And again, you need to check on this. I'm just trying to do this from memory. And that's how it has to be. Don't take the word of your governing bodies that say this is going to benefit you and us. It's not. You need to make sure. You need to push back. If they don't want to listen, I believe there's recall. You can recall your commissioners, I would think. or you can vote them out when it comes time. There has to be a penalty. I know that like I say, I use a lot of AI, but there has to be a better way to get it. Um, there has to be a better way that the companies pay their fair share when they build this. I get the whole idea of for profit, and I get the whole idea of capitalism for the most part. What I don't get is the fact that they feel they can put their foot on the necks of the community, the citizens in the community, and force us to take something we don't want to take. And it's as simple as that. If we don't want it, or it's not going to be a fair deal to you and your community, you need to stand up on your 2 feet and say, enough is enough. I'm done with this. Give us a fair deal, stick to it. Everything has to be done as you tell us and as we agree to. So I apologize for the long ramble, but it's up to us as citizens to fight back and make sure our legislatures and our community governing boards listen to what we have to say. Data centers can be good, but they have to prove their value to us first. All right, anyway, you all have a wonderful day. Stay good, stay out of trouble, stay calm, or not so panicky, or just have a great day. That's all. Get some tea, some coffee, and enjoy.